Hello everyone, Darkness here, and welcome to the video that details the changes made in Season 3. Now, I know I promised in the other video that this video would be going up shortly after the last one. Not quite accurate, but hopefully it's not too bad for you viewers. So, first off, I'm going to mention the most common change, or rather, it's not a change at all, because we are staying on Storm 3 Full Burst. And the reason for this is that myself and the other Naruto League staff have performed many tests over several months after the game came out. And leading up to Season 3, we really wanted to know if it was viable, because we knew a lot of people wanted it, and we wanted it too. But the fact of the matter is that the AI was just too unstable for the League. And what I mean by this is, and I've mentioned it in other videos, and haven't really gone in depth about it, but since this is a little bit of a catch me up kind of video, I will go a little bit more in depth on it. So the reason for it is that counters, they're the primary reason, and it's because they essentially break the AI in a way that the AI will just stand there and counter twice in a row at times, and they'll also from what we can guess, read the inputs of the other computer like throwing shuriken, and will try to counter them, which obviously does not work. So essentially what you have is a bunch of AIs wasting a third of their chakra bar, more often than you'd like it to happen. Not to mention the team type structure was a little off in terms of the AI as well. You had some characters who were good AI-wise, who actually performed well on one type and then were terrible on the two other types. You had some that were good on both on two types and bad on one type, and then you had a very select few characters that were good on every type. So something that we kind of foresaw was that there would be this hierarchy of very few characters that were way better than all of the rest, and it would totally off-put the balance of the entire league. And we just didn't want that to happen. So unfortunately we are not sticking with Revolution, but we are eyeing Storm 4 at the moment, and when it comes out, we are definitely going to be testing it extensively, just like Revolution. And since this is a main game in the series, I have a little bit more faith for it, and I'm willing to go a little bit further to try to make it work. And now we have what is possibly one of the biggest changes this season, if not the biggest change, which is the introduction of awakening types. Now, if you know anything about Revolution, this may sound a little familiar, but it isn't exactly the same thing. See, in Revolution, awakening type meant that a character could have both an instant awakening and a true awakening. In Naruto League, what has happened is that I've basically used my amazing modder skills that really aren't so great to make it so that every character, well, not every character, a select amount of characters can be switched between the type of awakening they have. So you could take an instant awakening character and make them a true awakening character. Now, as I mentioned, this is not available to all characters, but most teams will have at least one character that can be changed. However, this is only something that can be done at the beginning of every season in order to keep the, I guess, meta from changing too much. So that's basically it for that. So yeah, that's basically it for that first thing. And now we move on to our benching and dedicated support rule changes. So while going over some of these stats and the details of last season, I noticed that some dedicated supports performed much better than others, and I feel like that helped some teams way more than other teams. Like Hidden Stone last season, for example, had one of the best dedicated supports in the entire game, Katsuchi, and you know he's a close range support. But the thing is that he is pretty much entirely invincible, and his attack starts right away as soon as you call him out. And, you know, it was helpful, and teams still have the option to use him, but in a way, it kind of still held this kind of upset power balance. And, you know, that's normal. That's not a bad thing. But you know, it's been obvious that the free agent and dedicated support system needs some changes. It was a very new feature at the time when Season 2 started. It had only really been thought out for about a week or so beforehand, and, you know, I'm glad it turned out as well as it did, but there are some things that I want to do with it now that I hadn't thought of back then. Now, this is not a very large change to the system, but it will affect most, if not all, teams in the league in some way. So last season, dedicated supports were limited to 2 support uses a week. The change here is that in Season 3, is that the usage between your benched fighter and your dedicated support is shared, and will also alternate every week. So this means that if you use your dedicated support as a support for all 3 of your fighters, you can't use your bench fighter as support on all 3 of your fighters in the same week. Also, if you use your bench fighter as support on all 3 of your fighters in one week, you can only use them on up to 2 fighters in the next. Same for your dedicated support. So I feel like this is going to introduce a new kind of strategy to making your lineups and keeping it interesting and really seeing what the overall structure of a lineup is. Because as you may see over the course of this season, you have some teams who will use this 3-use support method, and then you'll have some that just avoid it entirely, so they never have to deal with the kind of cooldown situation. So it's kind of interesting in terms of seeing different teams' lineup structures. Now, just in case I kind of worded that weird, I'm going to provide an example. So let's say your hypothetical team consists of Kabuto, Tsunade, Deidara, BTS Sasuke, and Kimimaro as dedicated support. In week 1, you decide to bench Kabuto and use his support on Tsunade, Deidara, and BTS Sasuke. This will limit your support uses on Kimimaro to 2 uses in week 1. In week 2, regardless of who you bench, you won't be able to use their support on all 3 active fighters for that week, but you will be able to use Kimimaro up to 3 times. If you do choose to use him 3 times, it will alternate again in week 3, but if you choose to use neither your bench fighter nor Kimimaro 3 times in week 2, you'll be able to use either one up to 3 times in week 3. Though, as I stated before, you won't be able to use them both 3 times in the same week, regardless of how you plan their usage. So I hope that cleared things up. I'll probably provide some visual cues on screen as well. I know I can be a little unclear when explaining things sometimes. But anyway, let's move into our next change. So this is kind of a bigger change. A free agent and dedicated support change yet again, but this one, as I mentioned, is a lot more impactful. So the biggest change is that you have to use your base roster in the first trimester. So whatever free agent you pick up at the beginning of the season has to operate as a dedicated support for the first 5 weeks. This is being done to get teams familiarized with their base members in order to give them an informed decision in whether or not they should swap a problematic fighter out, making them a dedicated support. The next change that's being made to this system is the matter of making a base roster member a dedicated support. In Season 2, you were given the choice to swap one of your fighters out for your free agent, granted the fact that your free agent was operating as a dedicated support and was not a support-only character. This allowed teams to get one of their more lackluster fighters off of the front lines. However, every one of your base roster members needed at least 3 benches prior to making them a dedicated support. If you didn't do that, you'd have to swap them back out of the dedicated support role in another trimester to give them the rest of their needed benches. The problem with this was that while it gave teams more of a choice, it also served to restrict the choice they made in some way. This also allowed for some teams to abuse the feature, as free agents didn't submit to benching rules and could play in as many matches as they wanted without ever having to be benched. If your free agent plays exceptionally well, you could have just had them in every match with no repercussions. This changed in Season 3. Now, if you want to swap a base roster member out in the second or third trimester, you're making them a dedicated support for however long you want, and can be swapped with someone else on the team later. However, this means that the free agent you chose to swap in now has to submit to benching rules as if they were a base roster member. The moment you switch them in, they need 3 benches by the end of the season. But if you switch them back out to the dedicated support role, their benches will also become irrelevant, and if someone is switched back in, they must submit to benching rules once again. But they don't have to start their benches over, rather just pick out from the benches they left off at. So I'm going to provide another example. Let's say your team consists of Sai, Naruto, Zabuza, Roshi, and Obito as your free agent. By the end of week 5, their bench counts are Sai at 2, Naruto at 1, Zabuza at 1, Roshi at 1, and Obito at 0, although that doesn't really matter at this point. So let's say you swap Obito into a base roster role and Zabuza into the dedicated support role. Your bench counts are now Sai 2, Naruto 1, Obito 0, Roshi 1, Zabuza 1, but that is now irrelevant. And by the end of week 10, the bench counts are as follows: Sai 3, Naruto 2, Obito 2, Roshi 3, and Zabuza still at 1. If the team chooses to switch Zabuza back into the base roster role, whoever they switch into the dedicated support role will not have their benches apply either. However, it's important to note that in this hypothetical scenario, it wouldn't be mandatory to switch Zabuza back in. So let's assume we switch Naruto out. The bench counts would now be Zabuza at 1, Sai at 3, Obito at 2, Roshi at 3, and Naruto at 2, but he's irrelevant. And Zabuza would have to make up 2 benches for the end of the season, along with Obito having to make up his last one. Alright, and the last big change relates to the other choice you can make regarding your free agent. In Season 2, you picked one free agent at the beginning of the season, and stuck with that for the rest of it, choosing to either keep them a dedicated support or to switch them in as a fighter every trimester. However, that's going to change in Season 3. With the previous system, there were a few teams that picked a free agent that didn't really help them out in the long run, and this was something that they were kind of stuck with for the entire season. So now, you'll have 3 options when it comes to choosing what you want to do with your free agent. The following chart will list the options that you have in the second and third trimester, including one we've talked about already. So option 1 is to keep your roster the same. In the first trimester, you have to have your base roster, obviously. So let's say your base roster is Naruto, Tsunade, Sasuke, and Hanzo, and your DS is Sakura. You can just keep that the same if your team is flying. Now option 2 is switching your current dedicated support with a player on your base roster. This of course we've already gone over. So let's say we switch Sakura for Tsunade. And finally, we have the new option, option 3, which allows you to change your free agent with another free agent entirely as long as they're untaken. Now, they have to stay dedicated support for at least 1 trimester after this, so you can't just pick up another free agent and swap them in. Also, these rules apply for the playoff trimester as well. So alright, that's pretty much every change. Yeah, if it was a little long, I apologize, but there were some things I felt I needed to go into a little bit in order to enhance the whole viewing experience. So with that, thanks for sticking with me here, and I will see you all in the other episodes. So with that, So, so with that, thanks. So with that, so with that. Oh my god.